Alright, this is the video for the review worksheet 2.5 and 2.6, part 2, which is 16 to 23. So number 16 is f of x. That just means it's a function with the letter x in it. Equals x cubed minus 3x plus 28. So whenever we're finding all the zeros, all we have to do is, it's just step 1 of that red writing on the front board, which tells us how to actually find all the real zeros. We first have to find p and q. And we have to find the factors of p and q. And then finally we put all the p's over all the q's. So my p is 28. My q is technically 1. Because even though it's the leading coefficient, so you find the biggest exponent and the number that's in front of it. And ask yourself, well, how do I get 28? 1 and 28, 2 and 14, and 4 and 7. Well, how do I get 1? Well, 1 and 1. So I write this whole list. I write the whole thing, p over q. I write it over 1. So I say plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 7, plus or minus 14, plus or minus 28. And I'm done, because if I put them all over 1, it's the same thing. So I'm not even going to bother writing over 1. You could, if you really want to, you could put over 1, over 1, over 1, over 1, over 1, over 1. I usually won't do that. Alright, that's it. Alright, 17. Find my P. I find my Q. How do I get 9? 1 and 9, 3 and 3. Remember, you do not need repeats, so you don't have to do 3 twice. So I put my P over Q's. So I say plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 9. And then I do them all again. This time over 2. So I say plus or minus 1 half, plus or minus 3 halves, plus or minus 9 halves. And that's it. I would always look for fractions that can be simplified. But in this case there isn't any. So that's it. So I go through. So I have g of x equals 4x to the 5th plus 3x cubed minus 2x minus 14. There's my p. There's my q. 14 is 1 and 14, 2 and 7. Q is 1 and 4, and 2 and 2. Remember, I don't need to do 2 twice because it's a repeat. So I put my P's over my Q's. So I start with my list, and I put it over 1. So I say plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 7, plus or minus 14. Now I do my whole list, and I do it over 2. Plus or minus 1 half, plus or minus 2 halves, plus or minus 7 halves, plus or minus 14 halves. Remember, 2 over 2 is the same thing as 1, so I cross that off. 14 over 2 is the same thing as 7, I cross that off. Now I do plus or minus 1 over 4, plus or minus 2 over 4, plus or minus 7 over 4, plus or minus 14 over 4. 2/4 is the same as 1 half, so I cross off 2/4. 14/4 is the same as 7 halves, so I cross that off. So, simplified fractions are repeats. You have to cross them off. So that's your final answer. That's it for AT. Alright, 15 is your P, 8 is your Q. How do I get 15? 1 and 15, 3 and 5. How do I get 8? 1 and 8, 2 and 4. So my P over my Q's becomes plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 5, plus or minus 15. Then I do plus or minus 1 half, plus or minus 3 halves, plus or minus 5 halves, plus or minus 15 halves. Then I do it over 4, plus or minus 1/4, plus or minus 3/4, plus or minus 5/4, plus or minus 15/4. Then I do all over 8 plus or minus 1/8 plus or minus 3/8 plus or minus 5/8 plus or minus 15/8. That's my answer. That's it for 19. Alright, 19. We have f of x equals x cubed minus 12x squared plus 35x minus 24. Now, your options for 19 through 23 are step 1, find p and q, write the factors of p and q, then put all your p's over all your q's, just like we did on 16 through 19, or 18. Then, you're going to guess a p and q that works. You're going to use division. It works if no remainder. Alright? Works if there's no remainder. So that's how you know if you guessed right. Step 3 is then if you can factor it afterwards and solve it, just like we did in 13 and 14. Or you can just keep on finding new p's and q's. Some people really like synthetic division. They just keep on doing p's and q's. Alright, so 19. I find my p. 24. I find my q. It's 1. So my p's over my q's are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 8, plus or minus 12, plus or minus 24. Alright, I make my box. Put 1, negative 12, 35, minus 24. I'm going to guess 1 first. I put 1 on the outside. 1 times 1 is 1. Gives me negative 11. 1 times negative 11 is minus 11. Gives me positive 24. 1 times 24 is positive 24. No remainder. So x is equal to 1 is one solution, because that's 1. Now I'm left with x squared minus 11x plus 24. Well, I know that I can get 24 from negative 3 and negative 8, which means this is x minus 3, x minus 8. Because we're solving, I'm doing step 3, I'm factoring and solve. I set it equal to 0, so x minus 3 equals 0, x minus 8 equals 0. So x is equal to 3, x is equal to 8. So those are my 3 zeros. X equals 3, x equals 8. And that's it for 19. It actually worked out really well because we guessed right, 1 worked right away, and it made everything pretty simple. And that's it. Alright, 13, we have x cubed minus 31x minus 30. So I found my p is 30. My q is 1. So my p over my q's are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 5, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 10, plus or minus 15, plus or minus 30. Alright. Now, I'm going to put into my box. I need a placeholder. I need a placeholder because there is no x squared. So I put 1, 0, negative 31, negative 30. I put 1 outside the box. I'm guessing 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 0 and 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is positive 1. Gives me negative 30. 1 and negative 30 is negative 30. 1 is not a factor. So I like 1 doesn't work. So now I'm going to change this to negative 1, which makes this negative 1, which makes this negative 1. Makes it positive 1. Makes this positive 30. So no remainder. Negative 1 works. So now I'm left with x squared minus x minus 30. Well, I know that you can get 30 from negative 6 and positive 5. And that together adds up to negative 1. So I say x minus 6, x plus 5. Remember, it's equal to 0. So x minus 6 equals 0. X plus 5 equals 0. Which means x is equal to 6. X is equal to negative 5. And we're done. That's it. Alright, 15. Start off and find a p. I find a q. P, alright, the factors of p, that's 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Since q was 1, I know my p's over my q's are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 8, plus or minus 12, plus or minus 24. Make my box. Put 1, 7, 26, 44, and 24 inside the box. I guess 1. Drop down the 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 8. 1 times 8 is 8. Gives me 34. 1 and 34 is 34. Gives me 78. Not going to work. So now I'm going to try negative 1. 1 times negative 1 is 1. Or negative 1 gives me 6. Negative 6 gives me positive 20. Gives me negative 20. Gives me 24. Gives me negative 24. No remainder. So x is equal to negative 1 is one answer. Leaves me with x cubed plus 6x squared plus 20x plus 24. So now I have to make up basically a new problem, where that's my p and that's my q. Since my p and q didn't change, I get to use the same list. So I put a new box. I put 1, 6, 20, and 24 outside the box. This time I'm going to guess 2. I drop down the 2. 2 times 1 is 2. 6 plus 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 36. 72. 2 doesn't work. So now I'm going to try negative 2. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. I get positive 4. Negative 8 gives me positive 12. Gives me negative 24. No remainder. That means negative 2 is an answer. So I have x squared plus 4x plus 12. Well, I can get 12 with positive 6 and negative 2, which will give me negative 4. So I say x plus 6, x minus 2 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 6, x is equal to 2. So I get 4 answers. X equals 6, x equals 2. And those are my 4 answers. And that's it for 15. And I don't know why I said that's 15. That's obviously 22. Alright, 23, last problem. Find a P. Find a Q. How do I get 8, 1 and 8, 2 and 4? Since the Q is 1, so it becomes my P's and Q's just become plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 8. I put 1, 2, negative 9, negative 2, and 8 inside the box. I put 1 outside the box because that's what I'm guessing first. Drop it down. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. 1 times 3 is 3. Gives me negative 6. 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. Negative 8. Negative 8. No remainder. That means one answer is x is equal to 1. X cubed plus 3x squared minus 6x minus 8 is the answer. So I find a new P and a new Q. Since P and Q didn't change, I use this list again. So I make a new box. This time I put 1, 3, negative 6, negative 8. And now I'm going to try negative 1 because I already tried positive 1, so I don't have to try that again. Drop it down. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. 2, negative 2 gives me negative 8. Negative 1 times negative 8 is positive 8. No remainder. It means I have x is equal to negative 1 as an answer. It means I have x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. I could find a new P and a new Q, but I'm going to factor that into negative 4, positive 2, so I get x minus 4, or x plus 4, I'm sorry, x minus 2, so x is equal to negative 4, x is equal to 2. So So those are my final answers. X equals -4, X equals 2. And I'm done.